decisively. If the Confederacy fell, if the enslaved population was freed, everything she had built would collapse. Her special children would leave. Her breeding program would end. 16 years of work would be for nothing. She couldn't allow that to happen. On the night of March 17, 1864, Catherine gathered her biological children in the main house. Jonathan, Elelena, Abigail, Margaret, Samuel, William, Henry, Caroline, and the 3 youngest who were still infants. 11 children in total, ranging from 16 years old down to 6 months. Things are going to change very soon, Catherine told them, her voice calm, but her eyes intense. The war may end badly for us. The Yankees may come. There may be attempts to take you away from me, to destroy our family. I cannot allow that to happen. Elelena felt ice slide down her spine. What are you planning? We're going to secure our future, Catherine said. Tonight. She led them to the Heritage Room in the East Wing, the room none of them, except Jonathan, had ever been allowed to enter. Catherine lit the oil lamps, illuminating the shelves of journals, the vials of hair samples, the elaborate family trees drawn on paper and pinned to the walls. This is our legacy, Catherine said. This is what we've built together, and no one is going to take it from us. From a locked cabinet, Catherine withdrew a small wooden box. Inside were several glass bottles containing clear liquid. This is a medicine called laudanum, she explained. In small doses, it provides relief from pain. In larger doses, it provides eternal peace. Abigail gasped. You want to poison us? I want to protect you, Catherine corrected, her voice taking on an edge of desperation. If the Yankees come, if they free the others, where will you go? You're not white enough to live in white society. You're not fully black in their eyes either. You'll be outcasts, owned by no one, belonging nowhere. Is that better than staying here, staying together, staying with me? Yes, Eleanor said firmly. Anything is better than this. Catherine's face hardened. You're too young to understand. All of you are too young. But I am your mother, and I know what's best for this family. She moved toward the bottles, but Jonathan stepped between her and the others. He was 16, nearly as tall as Catherine, and something in his face had changed. No, he said quietly. Jonathan, don't be foolish. You understand the plan. You've always understood. I understood what you told me, Jonathan said. But Eleanor showed me the journals. I read what you wrote about us, about Father Isaac, about Father Thomas, about all of them. I know what you did. I know what you are. I am your mother. You're a monster, Jonathan said, and his voice broke on the word. Catherine slapped him, a sharp crack that echoed in the small room. How dare you? After everything I've given you, after everything I've sacrificed, you sacrificed nothing, Elelena said, stepping forward to stand beside Jonathan. You used people. You destroyed them. You destroyed us. Catherine looked at her children, seeing them clearly, perhaps for the first time. They were united against her. Even the younger ones who didn't fully understand what was happening sensed the confrontation and stood with their older siblings. She had lost them. In that moment, Catherine made a final, desperate decision. If she couldn't keep her children, if they were going to reject her and leave her and destroy everything she had built, then she would at least preserve the record of what she had accomplished. Future generations would know what Catherine Thornhill had created, even if the creation itself had failed. She grabbed the journals, the charts, the vials of hair samples, clutching them to her chest. "You think you can escape me? You think you can pretend none of this happened? These records will survive. They'll prove what I built here. They'll prove I was right." She pushed past her children and ran from the room, carrying the physical evidence of her crimes. Jonathan and Eleanor chased after her, but Catherine was faster, driven by manic energy. She ran through the main house, out the front door across the yard, toward the quarters. What happened next depended on who you asked. Multiple testimonies would later conflict, each person remembering the events slightly differently, shaped by their own trauma and perspective. What is certain is that Catherine reached the quarters carrying her journals and specimens. What is certain is that the enslaved population, roused by the commotion, emerged from their cabins to see the mistress who had tormented them for 16 years running toward them in the darkness, clutching the evidence of her atrocities. What is certain is that someone, maybe Hope, maybe one of the men, maybe several people at once, decided that this was the moment. This was when it ended. Catherine Thornhill disappeared that night. Her journals were found scattered in the mud outside the quarters, pages torn and muddy. The vials of hair samples were smashed. The charts were burned. And Catherine herself was simply gone. Jonathan and Eleanor reaching the quarters minutes after their mother found chaos. People shouting, running in different directions, the acrid smell of smoke where someone had lit a fire to burn Catherine's papers. But no, Catherine. "Where is she?" Jonathan demanded. Hope looked at him with an expression he couldn't read. "Gone? That's all you need to know. She's gone, and she ain't coming back." "What did you do to her?" "What she had coming," Hope said simply. "Now you got a choice, boy. You can raise hell about your mama, or you can understand that justice got done here tonight and let it rest." Jonathan looked at Eleanor. His sister's face was pale, her eyes wide, but she nodded slowly. "Let it rest," she whispered. The next morning, Catherine Thornhill was reported missing. Old Mr. Kendrick, the overseer, searched the property, but found nothing. He reported the disappearance to the sheriff in Milesboro, who came out to investigate, but ultimately concluded that Mrs. Thornhill had likely fled the area in fear of advancing Union forces. A reasonable assumption given the deteriorating military situation. No one from the quarters spoke of what had happened. Jonathan and Eleanor and the other children said nothing. The official record simply states that Catherine Thornhill disappeared on the night of March 17th, 1864, and was never seen again. But everyone at Thornhill Estate knew the truth, even if they never spoke it aloud. Catherine had been killed that night. Her body had been disposed of somewhere on the plantation's 1,700 acres, and her children, her biological offspring, her breeding experiments, her legacy, had chosen to let her murderers go unpunished because they understood that their mother had earned her fate. The war ended 14 months later. General Sherman's army swept through Georgia in late 1864, though they passed 30 miles north of Burke County and never came directly to Thornhill Estate. The Confederacy collapsed in April 1865. Freedom came to the enslaved population of Georgia through a combination of military occupation, the 13th Amendment, and the simple fact that the system of bondage could no longer be maintained. At Thornhill Estate, the transition was complicated. Jonathan, as Catherine's eldest child, had some legal claim to the property, but his status was ambiguous. legally enslaved under Georgia law, but also Catherine's biological heir. Lawyer Talbot in Hossborough tried to sort out the mess, but eventually gave up. The property fell into a kind of legal limbo. Most of the formerly enslaved population left Thornhill Estate within weeks of emancipation. They scattered across Georgia and beyond, seeking family members who had been sold away years before, looking for opportunities in cities, or simply putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the site of their suffering. Some stayed, at least initially. Hope remained, helping to organize those who had nowhere else to go. Thomas stayed, Eleanor's biological father, who finally, after 16 years, was able to acknowledge his daughter openly. They had one conversation about Catherine, about what had been done to him and to Eleanor, and then they never spoke of it again. The pain was too deep, too tangled with the fundamental wrongness of the entire situation. Elena herself stayed at Thornhill Estate until 1867. She learned in those years after the war how to exist as a free person, though the psychological damage of her childhood never fully healed. She eventually moved to Savannah, where she worked as a seamstress and married a carpenter named William Foster. She never had children. She never spoke publicly about her mother or her childhood. When she died in 1903, her obituary made no mention of Thornhill Estate or Burke County. Jonathan stayed at the plantation longer, trying to work the land with a small group of freed men who remained. But the cotton market was depressed, the soil was exhausted, and the property's reputation had begun to spread through the black community in Burke County. By 1869, Jonathan gave up and abandoned the estate. He drifted west, eventually settling in Texas under an assumed name. He died in 1891, and his few possessions included a small notebook where he had written over and over in tiny script, "I did not choose this. I did not choose this. I did not choose this." Thornhill Estate itself decayed rapidly. The main house was partially burned in a suspicious fire in 1871. The remaining structures fell into ruin. The land was eventually seized for unpaid taxes and sold at auction in 1878 to a timber company that cleared the old-growth trees and divided the property into parcels. But in 1871, something was discovered that brought the entire story back to public attention, at least briefly. A well driller working on a neighboring property accidentally broke through into an old system on what had been Thornhill land. Inside the system, 30 feet below ground, was a skeleton. The remains were mostly intact, preserved by the cool, dry conditions. They belonged to a woman, probably in her 30s or 40s. Scraps of cloth suggested a dress from the 1860s. A corroded metal locket found near the skeleton contained 2 miniature portraits, a man and a young boy. The coroner in Wasborough examined the remains and concluded the woman had died from blunt force trauma to the skull. The skeleton was buried in an unmarked grave in the county cemetery. The official record identified the remains only as unknown female, discovered former Thornhill property, 1871. But people in Burke County's black community knew who it was. The story had been passed down in whispers in kitchens and churches, in coded language that protected those who had been present that night. In March 1864, they knew Catherine Thornhill had been killed by the people she had enslaved and brutalized. They knew her body had been hidden in a deep well or system. They knew justice of a kind had been done. Over the years, more information emerged, though always fragmentarily, always incompletely. In 1889, a man on his deathbed in Alabama confessed to a minister that he had helped murder his former mistress in Georgia during the war. He provided no name, no details, but the minister noted the confession in his records. In 1902, a woman in Savannah, Hope's granddaughter, wrote a short memoir that mentioned the night the devil mistress disappeared and nobody mourned her. The most damning evidence came to light in 1923 when a historian researching Burke County's Civil War history discovered a cache of letters in the courthouse basement. Among them was a letter written in 1865 by Union Captain Samuel Reynolds, who had commanded one of the first federal units to enter Burke County after the war ended. Reynolds wrote, "We discovered disturbing evidence at a property called Thornhill Estate, indications of systematic breeding experiments conducted by the late owner upon enslaved persons, including her own biological offspring. The details are too grotesque to relate in full, but multiple witnesses confirmed that the woman, one Catherine Thornhill, had implemented a program to create a self-perpetuating enslaved population through forced reproduction across generations. The witnesses also informed us that Mrs. Thornhill disappeared in March 1864, and though they would not explicitly state what occurred, their meaning was clear enough. I have elected not to pursue the matter further, as it seems to me that whatever justice was enacted upon this woman was well-deserved. I have directed my men to say nothing of what we learned here." The letter was filed away and forgotten again until a graduate student found it in 1954, while researching her dissertation on Reconstruction in Georgia. She tried to verify the story, interviewing elderly residents of Burke County who might remember family stories from that era. Most claimed to know nothing. One woman, 93 years old, the great-granddaughter of one of the enslaved people at Thornhill Estate, said only, "Some things happened that needed to happen. Some people did things that needed doing, and that's all that needs to be said about it." The final mystery of Thornhill Estate concerns the 23 children found locked in the basement when federal troops arrived. Captain Reynolds' official report mentions them, as do several letters written by soldiers in his unit. The children were freed and placed with freedmen families in Burke County and surrounding areas. But what happened to them after that is lost to history. Some of them surely survived to adulthood. Some likely had children of their own, which means there are probably people alive today living in Georgia or elsewhere who carry Catherine Thornhill's genetic legacy without knowing it. They might be descended from Jonathan or Eleanor, or one of the other children from the breeding program. They might carry some of those distinctive features, pale green eyes, auburn hair, sharp cheekbones that marked Catherine's offspring. They would never know their ancestor built her legacy on one of the most calculated systems of exploitation and cruelty in American history. They would never know they exist because a woman decided to treat human beings as livestock, to build a dynasty on forced reproduction and genetic control. They would never know that their great-great-great-grandmother's body lies in an unmarked grave in Burke County, placed there by the people she had tormented, people whose names we will never know because they protected each other's secrets, even in freedom. The site of Thornhill Estate today is just fields and forest. The county maintains no historical marker. No books about Burke County history mention the plantation in any detail. The house's foundation is still visible if you know where to look. Buried under decades of leaf, fall, and undergrowth. The old well where Catherine's body was hidden has long since collapsed and filled with earth. But the story persists, passed down through oral tradition in Burke County's black community, whispered in genealogy circles, referenced obliquely in academic papers about slavery and eugenics. It persists because it represents something true and terrible about American history. Not just the brutality of slavery itself, but the ways human beings will rationalize and systematize cruelty when they hold absolute power over others. Catherine Thornhill convinced herself she was building something revolutionary, creating a new model for plantation management, securing her family's future. In reality, she was perpetuating and intensifying one of humanity's greatest evils. And the people she exploited, the people she bred and controlled and tormented, ultimately erased her from history as thoroughly as she had tried to erase their humanity. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or are there still secrets buried on that land in Burke County? The truth is, we may never know the full extent of what happened at Thornhill Estate. The people who lived through it, the survivors, chose to carry some secrets to their graves. And maybe that's their right. Maybe some stories belong to the people who endured them, not to historians or storytellers like me. But we can honor those people by remembering that their resistance mattered, that their survival mattered, that they outlasted the system designed to destroy them. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the hidden histories in your own community, let me know in the comments below. Share this video with someone who appreciates deep dives into America's darkest chapters. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge what you think you know about history. And remember, the past is never as far behind us as we'd like to believe. See you in the next video.